The left continues to have fallout over the Mueller report and want to impeach Trump, presidential politics, and the bombing of Sri Lanka. This is Matt Field, and this is Ditch Your Political Party podcast. So it's been a pretty intense week. I want to start real quick on the bombing of Sri Lanka. You know, it's ridiculous every time people and terrorists decide to come together and cause such mass carnage for whatever demented concept they believe they're trying to protect or employ. And this is exactly what happened in Sri Lanka. It was a very large correlation of 7 suicide bombers and more. 290 people have died so far, 500 injured, and 87 bomb detonators were found at the site. So, I mean, I guess there we can take some solace in the sense that perhaps it wasn't as large as it could be, but that doesn't change the fact that, you know, this was a strike on Christians around the world, you know, and it's interesting how the mainstream media will defend the Muslim faith, but they will not defend the Christian faith, which I find somewhat bizarre. I'm sure they've got some ulterior motives there. I, being a Christian, find this, you know, troubling. Of course, the Pew Research Center actually found that Christians are the most persecuted religion on earth, which is something you won't hear in the media, but that's the fact of the matter. And what can we do to prevent something like that? There's nothing you can really do with policy. There's nothing you can really do in the news, frankly. But outside just calling it for what it is, I think that's the only thing they could do in the media. But, you know, when it comes down to the tactical items that we could actually perform and prevent things like this, it just comes down to intelligence. You know, and it was said that the Indian government had some information, but they weren't sure on a couple different aspects, and they were just too short. They were too slow, and this was the result. So, you know, I think in a lot of ways it does come back to, you know, ditching. You know, we talk about ditch your political party. This is the whole concept of what we have going on here. Is when you begin to ditch these political concepts, these political ideas that are this overarching existence that we can't overcome. That, I mean, one of the perfect examples of this is racism. Is, you know, the media and politicians, they constantly talk about the effects of racism over and over and over again. You know, and in the town I grew up in, I was completely unaware of any racism that existed. I didn't know. I didn't think anything of it. And that's really what we should think of it as. You know, unless there is some sort of, you know, methodical way in which somebody or an organization that is consistently discriminating or doing these different things, then we really should only target those particular instances. But what happens in politics is they come forward and say, you know, like a lot of them have said, we need to put together some black reparation, you know, some slavery reparations bills, and we need to get some money out there to you guys and all this sort of thing. But they don't. But, you know, again, slavery's been over forever, and no one's advocating for slavery. No one, and I'd be really surprised if anyone at this point has any living relatives. There's no way there's no living relatives that experience anything like that. Maybe you have some relatives that are old enough to remember the stories that their parents told them about being a slave, maybe. But even then, I don't know what we're trying to repair here at this point. It's so far gone that now it's just a talking point. That's all it really is. And it's the same sort of thing. That's the same sort of thing that's happened in Sri Lanka here. Is, you know, the Christians are persecuted there. Christians are persecuted all over the world. Every religion is persecuted, and what we have to do is, the only thing we can do is we need to target the people that are actually doing this on a consistent and methodical basis. You know, ISIS wants to kill Christians. Other other types of organizations like that, terrorist groups like that, are trying to discriminate against Christians. Others are trying to discriminate Muslims, Jews, whatever it may be. Those are the people you need to call out. Someone like Ilhan Omar, who is clearly not a fan of the Jews, should be called out. That's really the only thing the media can do in that sense, and begin to start, and then just stop covering, and stop covering these silly advocations, and the politicians need to stop advocating for these silly things like slavery reparation. Now, was slavery bad? Of course it was, but it was hundreds of years ago at this point. So, there are a million things you could look back at and claim reparations for. We need to look forward and determine what it is that we can do to improve our lives and the lives of those around us, and eliminate the whole race concept. Everyone wants to develop all these different programs to help promote those of the minority, but at the end of the day, what you have to do is you just live. You gotta stop calling out these different colors that our skin is, these different accents we have, and all this. We just need to accept everybody. It seems like a very simple concept, a very logical concept, but because people are trying to intersectionally go after these different groups to help promote their campaign or their political ambitions, this is what happens. And so that's the name of the game. So if you are in a political party that is targeting any particular religion or any particular race or whatever it may be, and they're trying to promote it to one degree or another for whatever reason, then you need to sit back and ask, well, why are they doing that? Why is this particular race or this particular religion getting special treatment from this individual? And you need to examine that sort of thing, because there shouldn't be anything like that takes place. It should be the federal government and state governments should be catering to the mass, not to specific groups. When we talk about determining what logical morality is, it's when you can look at different principles of logic and whether or not it's sustainable, when it's applied to the extreme, what the result is, if it's beneficial or not. And then when a policy or whatever happens, you have to look at it and see, who does it benefit? It can't be one party or individual, nor at the expense of another. So as soon as you decide to look and see, people of whatever nationality, they get it's just like affirmative action, right? This takes place in a lot of colleges across the United States, where if you're a particular race, then the likelihood of you getting into that school is much better than if you're the typical white dude, right? Which is wrong. That's inappropriate. What you should base it on is merits. Whoever had the best test scores, all this sort of thing. And so, again, this is all leading back to what's happened over here in the bombing in Sri Lanka, is that when we decide if we're going to eliminate this sort of thing, we target particular individuals and organizations that are consistently creating an atmosphere or acting upon their hatred for a particular group or ethnicity or whatever it may be, and we call them out. And then the governments should do their best to eliminate this particular group, because it's wrong. Particularly in this case, this is the worst of the worst. An organization that's taking lives from others, that's the worst form of persecution there is. So our hearts go out to Sri Lanka for those that were involved in that, and we hope the fastest and quickest recovery for all those that were injured. The psychological damage is going to go on for many, many, many years, but hopefully they can take that and help inspire others to be better and to be the people that others need them to be. So that was kind of a softer note, obviously, but we'll get on to some politics and other issues that are going on this week. But first, thirsty. Are you a business owner? Do you have inventory of a product or component or ingredient that you no longer need? Are you dying to liquidate that inventory so you have the cash you need to invest back in your business? Is it getting to the point where you have to close your doors? Well, there's some smart people, and they are from Excess Supply List, and they came up with this website where you can actually list your surplus inventory or excess inventory, and to put the balance back in your favor. Excess Supply List is where you can list any excess inventory you have of anything for free. Now, there are some different restrictions and things like that, just for the sake of, the liability issues, I'm sure. But if you are looking to get rid of your inventory, you 99.99% are probably going to qualify to list anything that you have for free. You just go to excesssupply.com, click on Publish Your Ad for free. It'll go through a process where you set up an account, and then you are good to go. So you literally have nothing to lose. Go to excesssupply.com and list your excess or surplus supply. Get the cash back in your pocket. excesssupply.com. Check it out. So, of course, the Mueller report, no one still believes it. It is crazy the way that the left is going after this. It's the same sort of thing that, at first, 2.5 years ago, when this originally came out, I was totally on board with the idea of the investigation, because it was a little unusual for a president to sidle up a bit more, who was a bit more comfortable with Vladimir Putin, right? Vlad's not a good guy. He's never been a very good guy. Perhaps in his youth he was a good kid, but I can't speak to that. So it made sense for something like the Mueller report for this investigation to take place. The weird thing is they were just looking for collusion, which isn't really a crime for the president. It's more so the obstruction of justice side of things is what they eventually started leaning towards, because collusion itself isn't really a lot prosecutable, or it doesn't, and there's not really going to be that much. You can collude with people, right? They weren't under any particular contract that said, hey, you can't do this. So if anything, if they were under something like that, then there could have been some sort of civil type thing. But I think what they were trying to do is that was their excuse to try and dive a little deeper to see if they could find if there was any criminal actions that had taken place between the Trump campaign and Russia. So, at first, I was on board. And this went on for about, 4 months, 6 months. But at that point, they'd been digging so deep and nothing had come about that I was like, wow, I'm starting to think that this is garbage. There's not really anything here because they haven't found a thing, Granted, they had plenty of indictments, but as I've mentioned before, if you take someone in public life that has not been, they've fallen into their political realm. Again, they haven't really ditched their political party. They haven't actually lived by their ideals, but rather by what their politicians tell them. Then they would find themselves in some trouble at some point, in which case there would be some indictments that take place, fine here, fine there, right? That sort of thing went all over the place because of all the people they interviewed. They interviewed thousands of people. But eventually, it was pretty clear. Republicans and Democrats were all kind of on board with this at first. They were saying, let's figure out if there is something. But before too long, the Republicans were like, this is dumb. We're done. And so they stopped kind of supporting the whole idea. They didn't necessarily neglect it, but they stopped talking about it. And but the Democrats and the leftists were going to continue to push it, and they're still going to continue to push it. So though the Mueller report had nothing on collusion, nothing on obstruction of justice, they are still going to claim collusion. And some of them have even said, well, we'll see if we can find obstruction of justice. What are you talking about? The investigation's over. So I'm kind of confused as to what they're going to do. They're going to conduct their own investigation under, the guise of, I don't know, whoever, right? So now there's a bunch of private citizens running around out there trying to nail down this Mueller report thing, right? Trying to get Trump impeached. So there's a bunch of them calling for the Trump impeachment. Of course, Maxine Waters, who has been calling for his impeachment for ages, and there's a couple others that have called on that. But no one of significant, I would say. When I say significant, I mean like Nancy Pelosi and people like that. In fact, whenever Nancy Pelosi is approached with the whole idea of impeaching Trump, she always walks it back, right? So, it's not really a winning case. They don't have anything, because the last thing they want to do is go through impeachment proceedings and then they find nothing and they lose. And it just makes makes the Democrats look really, really dumb. Because when I think the Republicans went after when Bill Clinton had been impeached, he'd only been impeached to 1 degree, right? And so it wasn't a full impeachment. They didn't kick him out, but they did basically slap him real hard on the wrist. But it didn't really do anything as far as his presence is concerned. And if you told somebody that Bill Clinton had been, if you tell any millennial nowadays that Bill Clinton had actually been impeached, they wouldn't believe you. But he was, right? We all know that. So, but it didn't look, if nothing had happened, then the Republicans would have looked really, really dumb. So, anyways, so I think that's why most of the major Democrats are backing away from the whole idea of impeachment. So, now we're going to jump into a plethora of things that have happened the last while from all of these different political, or these presidential politics. We'll start with Elizabeth Warren. So, as we've mentioned, she started off super left in her campaign. I mean, she's always been very left. I mean, all the things that she's talked about have been very left. But then she was talking about how, capitalism is a good thing, and she's starting to go a little more centrist, but then she's just super vague. She doesn't know where she needs to be. She's just trying to do whatever she can to get attention, to get donations, whatever it is. I don't know. So one of her more recent things is she says, we're going to forgive all college debt. Okay, so there's a couple of big issues with this. There are a lot of companies that give out loans to students. So how on earth is the federal government going to forgive that debt? Because the forgiveness of debt isn't a matter of the traditional sense, right? The traditional sense of this is that they would actually that payments, everything else would be gone. So if I'd given you a loan for $10,000 and I forgave you the debt, no one's paying me back. I'm taking the hit. And so this is under the Constitution. She can't do this. She can't forgive the debt of any private debt. I mean, she might be able to do it on a federal level, right? Maybe. But not a great idea. I mean, considering our financial situation. For some reason, isn't it so weird that when you listen to the politicians nowadays, it sounds like we've got this big old war chest of stuff. We got so much money, it's mind-blowing. But the fact of the matter is, we have no money. All the money that comes in goes immediately out. Now, there's contingency funds, and I'm sure so there's some slush funds too that a lot of politicians pad their pockets with. But the fact of the matter is, there is really nothing going on in the federal government where we're able to retain any cash whatsoever. That is a constant movement of cash because we don't have any. We have nothing that we can actually hang on to. So how we're going to forgive debt, I don't know how we would do that financially. We won't. That's the fact of the matter. And the funniest thing is, she said this will actually improve your credit score. Yeah, that's a great idea. So what we're going to do is we're going to forgive the debt of people who have been unable to pay their debt. So those people can have better credit scores and go out and get another loan. So she's trying to set up the United States for another fail in the banks. So bravo, Elizabeth Warren. Not a big fan of Elizabeth Warren. Again, we tell you to ditch your political party. I do not care that she is a Democrat. I care what she says, what comes out of her mouth, what she's going to advocate for. And everything that I've seen her advocate for, everything I've seen her say, outside maybe a handful of comments, I have not agreed with. The only thing I have recently agreed with Elizabeth Warren is the fact that she said that capitalism is a good thing. Capitalism is a good thing. Crony capitalism is not a good thing. So you got to make sure you make that distinguishment. Sometimes people still get taken back. Oh, you like capitalism? Oh, it's terrible. No, crony capitalism is a bad thing, and the beginnings of capitalism weren't a good thing. So when you think back in the early 1800s, not early 1800s, late 1800s, early 1900s, where you're having little kids crawl into these different places, right? People hated capitalism for that reason, because if there was no more use for this individual, they just got rid of him. So, but eventually those sort of things change. So the current conditions where we have some different limits and things in place, it still protects the worker, still protects the people that take on all that risk, all that sort of thing. Capitalism is good. The whole concept of capitalism at the end of the day has benefited the U.S. economy. So I agree with Elizabeth Warren there, but everything else she said, she's so vague and she can't really put her finger where she actually wants to be. So how do you think she's going to be as a president? She gets in the White House, and it all depends on where her poll numbers are. So whatever she's going to do to make sure she can be elected a second term is what she's going to do. And then maybe she'll do whatever she wants to do when she's in her second term, if she made it that far. But not a contender as far as I can tell right now, unless some political winds change significantly. But even then, she's not a contender. I mean, in my book, she's out of the game. If Matt Field was the only guy that actually voted on anything, she'd already be gone. Then we have Bernie Sanders. And Bernie has the craziest concept right now. And for some reason, there's a couple others that are coming behind it because they don't have a spine. Bernie Sanders, he is somewhat considered the thought leader of the Democratic Party, because those outside Joe Biden, and we'll get to Joe Biden, he's the only one that is bringing forth these new ideas, and all the other ones are confused as to where they're supposed to be. They think they need to be far, far left, but their gut kind of tells them to stay center. And so they're fighting constantly with this whole idea because they don't entirely agree with the things they're trying to run on, but then they keep pulling back. That's the same thing with Elizabeth Warren. She's way over here on the left side of things, but then I think she's more of a true leftist than any of them. I mean, she's more on the left than anybody, but then she's always but then she'll drag back to the center to see if she can get some votes. So, but Bernie Sanders has always been as about as far left as you can get. He's a socialist. He declares it himself. And recently, when they did a CNN debate, or town hall, not a debate, a town hall, and they had asked if he had mentioned that people who had been incarcerated should be able to vote. So people who are in jail, who have violated the laws of the land, should have a legal right to vote. Now, again, there's a little bit of contradiction here. So if someone who is benefited by this particular action. Now, if you are to look at this logically, the person in jail is going to vote for the individual that is going to benefit them the most. That's how everybody votes, right? They vote based on their conscience, or the lack thereof, I suppose. Because if you're in jail, you've obviously done something that was illegal. And so what you're going to do is you're going to try and vote for the guy that's maybe going to be more lenient on things like drugs or whatever you're in for, right? So it doesn't make any sense to me to allow people who have broken the law to vote for those that are going to be more lenient toward them. Now, I'm not really sure where Bernie's going with this. Again, politicians are looking for votes. That's all they're doing most of the time, let's be honest. So someone gets up in this town hall and they say, hey, what about the Boston bomber? Would you let him vote? And of course Bernie Sanders says, of course he can vote. I mean, as touchy as that is, the Boston bomber puts a bag in front of a little boy full of bombs, right? That kid is killed instantly, and his brother loses a leg and all these different things. And he's okay with a man like that voting. He's going to still receive the right to vote while he's in prison. Are you serious? If that's going to be an intersectional area, if that's going to be a segment that you're going to begin to pursue, can you imagine what the politicians begin to promise these different people? How silly is that? Anyways, so he says this sort of thing. And then Kamala Harris comes up behind it. Okay, and they say, okay, so Bernie Sanders says that he wants criminals to vote. What do you think about this? And she kind of tiptoes around it for a second, say, like the Boston bomber. So the Boston bomber should be able to vote. And she says, I think we should have that conversation. Okay, anytime someone talks about having a conversation, we've talked about this with AOC. They said we need to have a conversation. What does that mean? What does that mean? Okay, one of the things that I hate the most when people come to me and they say, and I ask them about maybe a project we're working on or whatever, I say, so what's the deal? What's going on? They say, well, I sent an email over to so-and-so and now it's in their court. Now it's in their court? What are you talking about? This is your project. You don't wait for someone to get back to you to complete your project. You follow up again. You give them a call. You visit their office. Whatever you got to do to get the job done. And this is the same sort of thing. So Kamala Harris is one of those people. She's going to say, This is a politician for it's in their court. We should have that conversation. I don't actually want to do anything with it. I'm just going to do the next thing that gets this particular project off my plate so I can move on to whatever I want to move on to. And so if you have someone in the Oval Office that is going to continue to do this sort of concept, where they are going to just continue to push this thing off and leave it in their court, then you're never going to get anything done. It's the slowest process of working. So Kamala Harris is in that vote, and the funny thing is she basically, her campaign motto is walk it back always. So after she said this in there, someone asked her again, do you think someone should vote if they're a murderer? She said, oh no, you shouldn't do that, that's wrong. So it's really weird that she'll change her position in a matter of 24 hours to complete opposite. Now, I'm glad she did that because this is a really dumb idea. So I actually agree with her second policy, but the fact that she was talking about we should have that conversation on the first end isn't so great. She also is coming after the Second Amendment. Okay, the Second Amendment, we all know what that is. She says that she's going to make Congress do these different things, but then if they don't do it, she's going to do an executive order. Okay, now let's talk about executive orders real quick. Executive orders were created to enable the president to continue to act on whatever was immediately in need while Congress wasn't in session. So what is she talking about? The executive order isn't meant to legislate. Essentially what the executive order is Congress is out and there's a big decision that has to be made. It's a legislative type decision. Usually it would fall to the legislative branch, but since they're not in and we need action immediately, I'm going to write this up and we're going to have it done. But when they come back, what they should do is they should rescind the executive order, unless the president has that authority. At which point, then you would have the legislative body do what they do and legislate. But the executive branch isn't responsible for legislation. They're responsible for, basically they're a gatekeeper in one way or another. They're there to defend the Constitution and foreign or domestic threats, and they kind of say yes or no to the different legislation that comes through. But they themselves they don't actually legislate. They're not supposed to legislate. The only legislative branch is Congress. And that's the same problem I have with the judicial branch, is they don't actually legislate. Just because, for example, they ruled on gay marriage, or they ruled on, it doesn't make it legal, it just means that there's a precedent now. So if someone decides to go in an individual case and they say, hey, well, the federal government upheld gay marriage, so I should be able to be married, that's an element, that's precedent, that's an element of argument, right? So, but it doesn't mean it actually is legislation. It wasn't actually presented, it wasn't actually done. Now again, my opinion on for the most part, legislating should be taking place at the state level. There should be very little legislation that goes through on a federal level, if you ask me. And that's because the people in the various communities, so we talk about she's talking about gun control, Kamala Harris. She wants to firm things up, right? If you like gun control, don't go to the president and ask him about gun control. You know the chances of him actually getting anything done on gun control is? Like a big fat zero. Have you seen any federal, anything that the Democrats or Republicans have presented in effects to do anything with gun control, to limit the Second Amendment in any way? Has any of that passed? No, it doesn't pass. Stuff like that just doesn't pass. It just doesn't happen very often because it's such a hotly contested type item, and it should be a hotly contested, because if it's at the federal level, it affects the entire nation. So there shouldn't be any voting on the Second Amendment in the United States at a federal level. So however, for example, you have Chicago, right? Chicago has probably the most gun control laws in the nation, and that's because the people of Chicago wanted the gun laws. right? They pushed for those gun laws. Now, I'm not intimately involved in how that all took place and everything else. Maybe some of the people, I'm sure people were opposed to it. Maybe others, they had more of a majority of people supporting it. I don't know. But the fact of the matter is that Chicago and places like New York have instituted some very heavy gun control type laws to prevent the use of guns, right? Has it worked? That's a totally different debate. But they had the ability to do that. So if you love gun control, you like the idea of gun control, first I would encourage you to look up on that information, because it seems as though those places with higher gun control have more shootings and those with less gun control don't have shootings. So you need to look at those statistics first, but think through it logically. But thinking again through it logically, if you ditch your political party and stop going after all this political pandering, gun control is obviously a hot button, but you're not going to get it done at the federal level. You're going to get it done at a local level. Most likely, if you were able to get a big band of people together and you went after City Hall and you talked to them about it, they're more likely to implement something than the government, than the federal government. So anyway, that's basically my position on a lot of things. Same thing with gay marriage. If you want a gay marriage, you want to do different, if you want to be whatever, then you go to the state in which it is legal, or the city in which it's legal, right? It doesn't have to be a federal thing. That's the part that's always confused me. Why don't we use the 11th Amendment and start looking at that a little more clearly? Everyone wants all this massive change. Do it at a local level. The only reason they'd like to push for the president is because of the optics. Outside that, there's no reason for it. So, if you want to try and impose your will across the entire nation, then you're looking at the wrong place. And that's not what the legislative branch was for. We are the United States, but each state can function pretty independently in different ways to more effectively help their citizens than can the federal government. Since when did you, and again, I always talk about this. I always talk about how inefficient the federal government is. But then everybody's like, hey, when you go talk to the president, we got to go to the president of the United States. They have to make sure they have all this. When was the last time the federal government actually did something right for you? I cannot think of the last time. In fact, the last time is taxes. And I got hammered. Okay? Because taxes are dumb. And I know that all that money I sent to Washington is just going to go down a great big hole. They're putting it straight down the toilet. It's in one of the restrooms in the White House for them to utilize as they need. That's where my money is. And I hate that. The federal government has done jack for me personally, recently. Now, if there was a legitimate threat, now that's when the federal government comes in play. And I love the fact that we have a really strong, really strong military. And there's nobody that dare take us on, right? There are some that'll flirt with it. There's some politically they can kind of get away with silly things. But for the most part, I feel entirely safe in my community because the federal government does have a very strong military. But outside that, I'm thinking, what has the federal government done for me? Nothing. All they do is take from me. Now, if you're of a different race or you're something like that, then it's highly likely that you've received some compensation. We have a reservation not far from here, right? And they receive money from the federal government immediately. There are those that are on Social Security checks. They receive money from the federal government. And so they might like the idea of that. And they probably have more motivation to go after those sort of things. But I myself see in the rising generation, if you examine your life, where on earth is the federal government contributing? They aren't contributing anywhere. Most likely it's your local officials. Don't confuse the cops on the street and the parks in your neighborhood with the federal government, because they have nothing to do with that. Now, if your city is poorly managed, then perhaps they're using federal funds to do a lot of these things. But if they're using the taxpayer dollars appropriately and efficiently, then for the most part, the city that I live in, they manage it pretty well. Now, I have my own issues with our local government, but for the most part, they've got it together. And Utah as a whole, they've got it together compared to most states. Look at California. $1 trillion in debt, really? Utah has zero debt. Okay? We're already miles ahead of most cities, or not most cities, but most states. Anyway, so that's my line for the 11th Amendment. Now, we're going to jump on to Buttigieg and Joe Biden here in just one second. But first, we're going to talk about your health. Some of you have suffered from autoimmune disease. And look it up. You'd be surprised how many of you are struggling with autoimmune type symptoms. Have you ever tried using a diet that helps remove that inflammation from your body? They call it the AIP diet. Some people, and the SCD diet, it's the autoimmune paleo diet, and the specific carbohydrate diet. Those are catered very specific to those types of needs. And there's a company called Autoimmune Health and Nutrition, where a sister educated a brother and a brother helped a sister. Their line of 100% compliant paleo, keto, SCD, and AIP proteins are #1 on the market. They are the cleanest option available and taste great. So go to primalhn.com or autoimmunehn.com and use promo code DYPP at checkout and get 20% off your entire order. If you are tired of the conventional way of healing, let Autoimmune Health and Nutrition help you along the holistic path to healing. Go to primalhn.com, autoimmunehn.com, use promo code DYPP at checkout. Again, autoimmunehn.com. So Pete Buttigieg, who is the mayor of South Bend, Indiana, has been picking up steam. And that's probably because he's very articulate. He was a Rhodes Scholar. He went to Harvard. He did all these different things. He's a pretty impressive guy when it comes to his resume. And I mean, South Bend, Indiana is a pretty tiny place, but he's getting a lot of traction because of the things that he says. I think, in my opinion, for a couple of intersectional reasons. Because, again, the media likes to point out the differences in people, right? They like to point out that, hey, this person's gay, this person's black, this person's Hispanic, this person's whatever. So they like to look at all the differences. When you were a kid, your folks said, don't worry about that sort of thing. Everyone, I come from a community that says everyone is a child of God, right? So what difference does it make if they look different, or they act different, or whatever? That doesn't matter. What we do is we still love each other, we still help each other. That's the way that we should act. However, the media is convinced that by pulling out these differences, it benefits society, which they are completely wrong by. But that's one of the reasons why Buttigieg is getting a lot of attention. But he is trying to redefine religion. Now, I hate it when politicians bring up Scripture, because I guarantee them I know the Scriptures much better than they do, just because of my background as a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. We, like many other religions, review the Scriptures fairly frequently. So it's got to be it's an item of contention for me, and I'm sure for many others, when people come out and they like to quote a single verse that their publicist put together for them, or whatever. But if you were to ask them where that was found, or what else it was talking about, they wouldn't have a single answer for you. They wouldn't know, unless they already had it memorized off the cuff. Then you can get a little more deeper, and there's no way they can answer those questions, because it's not a document. The Bible, or in my case, the Bible and the Book of Mormon, are important to me. So there's no way, if they reviewed that, they would actually know what else was in it, other than what plays to their agenda. And that's the case with pretty much anything else, right? You don't want someone pulling a small passage out of a book to just meet their agenda. You want it to be read in context. So he's coming out and saying he's trying to redefine religion by it being, that we just like to accept everybody. Which is really good rhetoric. I mean, it sounds good. But then he's talking about how, that God doesn't have a political party, which is probably true. That's 100% true. There is no political party that God supports. However, there are several principles that if you are actually religious, you would know what those were. And those contradict many of those things on his end. But the problem is the media is going after this because they don't like religious people. They think that intellectuals are much more fit and much better for the nation than anyone else. So Buttigieg for the most part is probably one of the better candidates on the Democratic side, but that bothers me. That bothers me big time. But we're going to see more and more as they contrast and they enter into, they do the different debates and things like that, how it's all going to play out. And my hope is that it's going to be it's going to be very, very impressive as to who is going to stand out, and that'll be interesting, because now they're starting to really go after each other. So, and finally, we will end. Well, let me just say one thing about Bill de Blasio. Of course, he's the mayor of New York City, and again, as we talked about, mayors have actually great power, and city councils have great power in instituting different laws that can affect you at a very intimate level. And if you really want change in your government, then you need to go to your local officials. It doesn't need to be all across the nation. Keep that in mind. It doesn't have to be all across the nation. So, but Bill de Blasio comes out and he has a amazing idea. His idea is that they no longer want to build any buildings in New York City made of glass and steel because of environmental reasons. So then I personally go back and I think, well, what else are they going to build it in? Because if you look at all the structures in New York, they're very, very tall. So even if they decided you basically need glass and steel to do that. That's the only way in which you're able to build a structure that large. But if you're to do it in more the conventional way, where you use, lumber to build your structure, how is that any different on the climate? I guess is my question on there. The environmental reasons, right? We're still chopping down trees to build these things. So I guess, I don't know. Again, another really weird thing from the left. What's wrong with building buildings? Basically, before too long, everything is going to be wrong. Everything you do is going to be wrong, according to the left. You can't use steel anymore. You can't use glass. You can't drive your car anymore. According to AOC, you can't have cows that release their methane into the air that fart. You can't have things like that. So basically, our politicians are creating a world in which we can walk on eggshells all the time, because we love to do that. We love to walk on eggshells because you can offend anybody with anything. You can look at them the wrong way and somehow you're being racist. This is the nation we're starting to create, because what are we doing? We are accepting the shoulder devil's opinion of our political party. We're letting the tiny little, whatever it is, little Republican or that tiny little Democrat or that tiny little independent, whatever, whisper in our ear and say, hey, steel and glass, they're bad. They're so bad. We need to get rid of steel. We need to get rid of glass, because that's going to help our environment. That's right. I hate steel now. I hate glass now. So if you really hate steel and you hate glass, you should probably go throughout your house and get rid of it all, right? Oh, but that was already there. Well, if it's a principle, then really you should follow it anywhere you are. So you see how ridiculous this is? If there was no steel, no glass across the world, right? Across the nation, whatever, we'd be in a world of hurt. First off, our market would dive. We'd have some serious issues on that end of the world. And, good luck to those that are in dense populations who want to have people living there. Because if this bill passes, just like any city, New York is probably one of the highest land values in the world, right? But as soon as they ban glass and steel, it's going to skyrocket. So if you got real estate in New York, hang on to it for a little bit. Wait till Bill de Blasio's bill passes, right? Anyway, completely ridiculous. So finally, we get to Joe Biden. Joe is finally in, ladies and gentlemen. And at first glance, he doesn't look so bad. They've been going after him the last little while, but and Joe's already run in 1988 and 2008 and wasn't successful. But this time he's actually got a good crack at it, because he was the vice president to Barack Obama, which obviously gives him name recognition. And he's entering the race as, wait for it, a moderate. So if you listen to his announcement, it actually sounds quite conservative. He's talking about how he wants to bring people together. He does go after Trump pretty well when it comes to the I'm drawing a blank here, but he goes after Trump a little bit for some of his past actions, and he and he kind of establishes him that way, which is kind of what you want to do anyway, because the Charlottesville issue, right? The massacre where all that sort of thing took place, and Trump had talked about how there are good people on both sides. So there's a bunch of the side that's bringing the controversy is the side where they had just a bunch of racist white supremacists. There weren't any good guys over on that side, right? So that's what's drawing all the controversy, and so this is what Joe Biden is going after. And so actually the way he speaks, the way that he talks, he actually sounds like a better option than Trump. I mean, when you first hear it, here's the catch though. Right now, I mean, he was probably just going over he was going over the fine tooth comb, trying to determine how he announces and how he goes after this. And that's the part that I struggle with, is because I've heard Joe Biden talk super leftist, I've heard him talk super conservative, I've heard him talk centrist. So I don't actually know where Joe stands. A President Biden might be a lot like an Elizabeth Warren. However, he does have a record of being very bipartisan, which I think would be good for the nation. Now, whether or not he gets my vote, I don't know, because I don't know where he's going to be standing later on, because he's got a long road ahead of him. And he's got a long, big past he has to explain, and it's already being brought out. I mean, the Delaware University has thousands of pages while he was a senator of information that he donated that they won't release until after he's elected, or if he's elected as president. So, I mean, that's weird. I mean, what's the issue? Problem is let's be real. The majority of the information with Joe Biden is already out there on public record. Everyone can go after it, and everyone will go after it, because he is currently the front runner. This might be the best time for Joe Biden, because now everyone's just going to slam him down. But if Joe actually sticks to the whole idea of, if he sticks to the whole, he's a very likable individual, as opposed to a Donald Trump. Donald Trump is very divisive, right? You either love him or you hate him, or eventually you live to tolerate him. There's been a lot of things he's done in his administration that I've liked, but honestly, lately he's been a real drag, and he's done a lot of stuff that's been really dumb. I mean, there's a lot of people. I mean, it's very easy to love Trump sometimes, and it's very easy to hate him sometimes. Some people may just experience the hate side of it. But if you're looking at things logically, you would see the love-hate thing that goes on constantly. But, I mean, you need to have someone like Joe could be quite smooth. He might be able to really smooth things over, really clean some things up. The problem is now all the leftists are going after him, saying that, hey, he's done this, he's done this, he's done this, and the media's going to go after the same thing, right? Because they have a leftist agenda, and Joe's not left enough. So, who knows what'll happen. He is already polling very well, but there's still a huge chunk of people that have no idea who they're going to vote for. So we'll see. I mean, this is literally the election of 2016. The campaign of 2016 for the Republicans, and obviously there aren't going to be Republicans running against Donald Trump. I'd be surprised if they did. They don't really stand a chance. But the Democrats, they're in the same boat as the Republicans were a few years ago. So it'll be interesting how this takes place. You got 20 or so different Democrats in the race. Some of them are super, super left. Some of them are centrist. Some of them are even a little conservative. So it just sort of depends on how it shakes out. But time will tell. So, thanks guys. Like us, share us, ditch your political party, and start thinking critically, because that's really the only way anything's going to happen. And just one quick message before I go. Convention of States. If you haven't signed it yet, go and do it. ConventionofStates.com. Sign it. This is the one way that the people can have power to do some different things through the states to help affect what's going on in the federal government. And I think the number one item on my list is you got to get rid of all these senators and all these congressmen and women that have been there for a million years. They've been there for a million years. You need to break down. For heaven's sakes, the White House, they have term limits. President of the United States has term limits. All of our senators and all of our congressmen and women can have term limits too. So let's go for equal opportunity everywhere, even in Congress. They would never vote on it, but there are ways to do it. So go to conventionstate.com, sign up for it, and let's get it done. All right. Thanks, guys.